Hello, welcome to Be With the Word. I am Dr. Jerry Creed. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist in Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm here with my co host.
I'm Dr. Peter Malinowski. I'm a clinical psychologist in Indianapolis, Indiana, at the crossroads of America, and it is good to be with you.
It's great to be with you, Peter. And here we're going to be talking about a really important area, which is fear and how to overcome or how to work through, how to triumph over fear. And we're going to give you some very specific ways that you can do that. So we're really excited. And this is being interwoven with this Sunday's readings. And if you have not already, go and read this Sunday's readings, which is the 12th Sunday in Ordinary Time. And if you'd like, what's even better is go over and listen to our other podcast, Hear the Word, and listen to us read it to you. That's all there is. That's all there is there. But we do it every week for your benefit, and because it might be just easier to listen, and I think you get more out of it. But before we get into this whole topic of fear and overcoming fear, I wanted to make special mention of Dr. Peter's community. He's got a community called Resilient Catholics. And maybe you could say just a word or two about that.
Resilient Catholics, Carpe Diem. That's the community that's formed around my podcast, Coronavirus Crisis, Carpe Diem. And what we're trying to do in that community is really rise up to the challenges that the coronavirus crisis has brought to us, and really go beyond resilience to seizing those opportunities. And it's really interesting because we just completed a small group workshop on on managing fear, essentially, about how to basically about stress management. And we practiced some breathing exercises. We also do some progressive muscle relaxation, all the kinds of things that take it to the next level to being able to reduce anxiety and
So if
to
you're
grow in
listening and
courage.
you're if you're listening and you're interested in joining this community, what do you have to do?
You got to go to soulsandhearts.com, look for the Resilient Catholics Carpe Diem community, log in. If you haven't logged in, if you haven't registered, register and join that community. First 30 days are free. After that, there's a small charge of $25 a month, but we do a lot of like real hands-on experiential work in a lot of different areas in there. So love to have you with
Sounds
us.
awesome. Sounds
So,
awesome. All right, let's get
so
into our readings. So this week,
this week, I started with Jeremiah, and as many of you probably know, Jeremiah is known as the weeping prophet. He had an incredibly difficult ministry, and so many challenges and so many difficulties, so many so many frightening things, right? So he opens with, yes, I hear the whisperings of many, terror on every side, denounce, let us denounce him, right? He is in real danger, right? And so he is intimately acquainted with the very normal and natural response of fear. And so I decided that, especially given our current day and age where there's a lot of societal unrest, we've got the protests going on, and then also alongside sometimes violence, a lot of financial uncertainty, job uncertainty. There's a lot of fear out there, and so I really wanted to focus on what's going on with fear. How can we triumph over fear?
yeah, I thought this passage in Jeremiah was really interesting too because it was really, he does seem really threatened. And then I was looking at, okay, well, what does he say, at least in this passage, is the answer? He says, "Let me witness the vengeance you take on them," which sounds, a little bit awful. But he says, "For to you I have entrusted my cause." So
That's
to
right.
me, there's a giving it over to God, right?
There's a giving it over to God. And I think people get that, at least on an intellectual level, that we have to hand this over to God. But I'm
Hmm.
really interested as a psychologist in what goes on psychologically, what goes on in the natural realm that makes that difficult for us, right? We can say
Hmm.
it's just all spiritual and it's just a spiritual battle. But remember that grace perfects nature, right? It doesn't destroy nature, St. Thomas Aquinas tells us. So what goes on in the natural realm that can either facilitate us trusting in God or hinder our trust in God? And so that's the stuff that I was particularly focused on.
Right,
Because our Lord tells us in the gospel too, he leads with, fear no one. And he's basically telling us, fear
right.
no human being. no human being can really harm you, right?
Hmm.
So, but that's really hard for us to just will, okay? Because we've got natural fear responses wired into us at a neurological level, basic at a basic survival level, at a very primitive level that are outside of our conscious awareness. And so, our natural response in under threat is to feel fear. So
Right.
we're working with a natural response. And how do we get through that? So that's what I was really pondering on. And I came up with a bunch of ways that people make their fear worse and make their courage stronger. Things that they can do psychologically that increase courage, that help foster fortitude. So
So, all right. Well, I look forward to hearing them. What have your things that?
What I read. Well, this is the point where you ask me, and what are they, Dr. Peter?
That's what I'm doing.
Yes, I'm going to get into those right now. So one of the things that happens with fear is we lose a sense of time. We lose a sense of being in the present. We either go to the future or we go to the past in a way that's not helpful to us. So if we go to the future, we imagine a scenario in which things don't work out, in which bad things happen, in which we fail, in which we are, in which we experience some kind of really negative consequence. Or we go to the past to some memory of a similar situation in which some really unpleasant event happened, maybe even a trauma. And so one of the things that happens is that we get somehow leave the present. And when we leave the present, we've lost the only moment that we really have, the only moment that we really possess. And so the first thing is let's really stay in the present. Let's really stay in the present and ask the question, do I have what I need right now? Because when we get into the future, we can play out these scenarios, like I said, that where we can imagine us not having what we need, where we can imagine like struggling because we're missing something. And when we go to the gospel, what does our Lord tell us about the present, right? He knows the number of hairs on our head. He's going to provide us everything that we need in the moment.
Yeah, I think he really does an interesting job here when he switches from talking about the hairs on on your head and that you're worth more than sparrows,
Hmm.
because to me he's linking that not having fear to knowing your identity, and suggesting that if you know who you are, you won't be afraid. I mean, or at least if you have fear, you'll be able to triumph past it and have courage through it, right?
Right. If we're really able to embrace that identity of being beloved children of God, that
Right.
that's where the security really comes from. And that goes to one of these other points, right? A lot of times we feel like we don't know enough to feel confident. We don't understand the situation well enough to move forward. And so we get this paralyzing fear that comes in and keeps us stuck wherever we're at. And frankly, going right to what you said, knowledge, understanding, having control over circumstances or situations, that doesn't actually increase our sense of security or our sense of safety.
Mhm.
And sometimes people do this. You see people that are reading everything there is to read about the coronavirus crisis, or they're reading
Right.
everything that there is to read about the riots, and there's an attempt there to get enough knowledge to feel safe, because if I read all this stuff, then I'll know what to do. It's a fantasy. It's like a hamster on one of those wheels. The more you do that, the more you spin, but you don't actually feel safer. You don't feel more secure. You don't have a greater sense of security. What we need to do instead of seeking knowledge, and it's not that we should be naive or uninformed, but instead of that being the primary focus is remembering our identity as beloved sons and daughters of God. We can only do that in the present. We can only do that in the present. And so we got to slow it down. We got to take it to the present. We got to ask that question, do I have what I need right now? If we can do that, if we can do that, it can help reground us again in the present.
Right. Right. Yeah, and it's interesting. I want to say it was Philip Zimbardo, right? Who's a social psychologist I think he was really famous for the Stanford prison experiments and
Right.
all
The
that
prison experiments.
way back when. But he more recently has a book. He talks about time and he's talking from I believe a very secular perspective, but he does talk about people having a time orientation. Like some people are stuck always looking at the past. So if you're stuck you're always regretting, you're always rethinking, you're always worrying about what should have been or how you might have done something differently. And then there's other people who are completely future oriented. And
Right.
so they're always worried about what's going to happen in the
Right.
future, right? And
Right.
actually, I think what he says, if I remember right, it's been a few years since I actually listened to him at a conference, and he talked about present orientation was the best, but with some future.
Right.
Because the
Right.
people with no future orientation, it's like the marshmallow experiment, right? Where the kids are told, like, here's a marshmallow, wait 5 minutes. If you don't eat it, I'll give you a second one. And
Right.
all the
I'll
kids
give
that
you
just
two.
gulp up the yeah, you get two. And the kids that
Right.
only take the one marshmallow and wait for the second marshmallow, those kids are actually have more future success, by secular standards, because they can delay gratification,
It can delay gratification.
right?
Right.
Whereas
Right.
so you need some future,
Right.
enough to be able to plan ahead and to
Right.
be able to work toward future goals, but your overall must be in the present, right? You must be
That's right.
grounded.
Well, and planning for the future is something we do in the present, instead of trying to live in the future, right? To
Right.
live in some place, or that we live in the past. So this present orientation is really important, coupled with the experiential knowing, right? Not just the head knowledge, but the experiential knowing that our safety and our security comes from God, right? To
Mm,
remember that, right? That's
right.
something that I think is just really important, because we're not relying on our own strength. One of the things that comes up and I think really gets in the way of taking courageous acts is to say, I don't have the resources, I don't have the strength, I don't have the virtue to do this. And
Mm,
of course we don't, right? On our own strength, we can't. Now, this is where we depart, where you and I depart, where Souls and Hearts departs from a lot of secular psychology, because a lot of secular psychology is going to talk about an increase in self-confidence, all right, an increase in the confidence in our own capacities.
mm,
And one of the things that we want to be able to do as Catholics is to say, okay, we want to recognize our talents, we want to recognize our strengths, we want to recognize the good things, the good qualities that we have, but we also want to recognize that we're animated by grace, right? That God is actually working in the moment, and that's why the hairs on the head are so, knowing that God knows how many hairs are on it is so important, because we can have this subjective experience of God just being a long way away,
mm,
and it can feel that way, and we can come to believe that
right.
when it's not true, because our subjectivity doesn't determine the reality, and it sometimes doesn't even reflect it. It doesn't even reflect God being near us.
Yeah, yeah. It's interesting. Like with all the things going on, honestly, like to me, the pandemic is one thing, and maybe that has simmered down. The fears around that has simmered down. Things seem to have quieted a little bit. Things are opening up a bit, so there isn't this fear of the unknown, right? But even the fact that there were protests and then some violence happened in those protests, and then there's ended up for some people there's just genuine fear, like, is my business going to get attacked,
Right.
right? Something like that. And I know that for me, some of those generalized things, even if they're not happening to me, they cause me some anxiety.
Right.
And
Right.
just feeling anxiety around, hey, this world that I'm living doesn't feel as safe as it used to. It doesn't feel as stable. Even like the stock market, I'm not sure where that's going to go. I'm not sure, you know what I mean? Is something bad going to happen in my neighborhood? There's just a lot of high tensions. And I think that what you're saying makes sense, because clearly there I think I go to negative future states, like,
Yeah.
well, what if this happens, what if my kid is in trouble, what if I'm in danger, what if I lose all my savings or something like that, right? I get
Right.
into that. And I lose touch, right? I think this is what you're saying, right? I
Right.
lose touch with who I am as a son of God.
Right.
And if I can get in touch with that and recognize, okay, he knows every hair in my head,
Right.
he loves me. He will take care of me one way or another. I can let go,
Right.
even if like bad things happen. Isn't
even
that
when
what
bad things happen.
Job has to learn that at the end of Job? I felt like he has to say, "I surrender to you, Lord. I let go of trying to control and manage everything,
Right, and
and
not
I give it to
and
you."
accepting that we don't understand some, that
Hmm.
we accept that we don't understand, and then we accept that we don't control. But that's exactly right. That idea that our Lord not only knows how many hairs are on our head, but He knows every thought, every emotion, every desire, every impulse, everything that's going on within us, all the things that are going on within us that we're not aware of, right? Because they're in our unconscious, because we're not in touch with them. All of that He knows.
Yeah.
All of that He
But
knows.
then, but to me, what I'm talking about is just stabilization on some level, like getting to a point where I'm not overwhelmed by what's going on. But it would be another thing for me to then, deal with that and then be able to actually do something courageous, take
Right.
some kind of risk because I feel called to do something good, even if a negative outcome is possible.
Right. And this is where some people have a confusion between courage and fearlessness, right? They
Hmm.
assume that they lack the virtue of courage because they feel so afraid or they feel so much anxiety. And actually, if you don't feel some fear or you don't feel some anxiety, the virtue of courage can't really exist, right? Because courage is like being able to take that positive action anyway, in spite of the
Right,
fear,
right.
in spite of the anxiety, right? If you look
You
at
know
our
that
Lord, go ahead.
Uh-huh.
I'm sorry.
You know that always bothered me about the superhero Daredevil. He was the man. He was the man without fear,
Right.
and he was blind. And he was one of the rare Catholic superheroes,
Oh.
like explicitly Catholic. Like he would go to confession and stuff like this. But he was blind, right? And he could, which was interesting. But he had other senses, like he could tell other things, even though he was blind. But he was the man without fear, and he was like acrobatic and super fighter and all this. But I always thought, you know what? That's awesome that he's the man without fear. That sounds cool. But does that mean he's not brave? Like, it doesn't matter to him. Like, it would be a big deal for me to do his actions. I would have to overcome tons of fear. He just does it. Like, it's a little bit like Superman. Like, when you're that powerful, do you ever actually, like, how courageous are you when you know you can't be defeated, right?
Well, and if you look at the example of our Lord, right, a lot of fear in the Garden of Gethsemane to the point that, blood vessels were bursting in his skin, and that blood flowing out through his sweat glands. It's a lot of fear.
Mm-hmm.
Because in the natural realm, he understood what his passion was going to mean in terms of that physical and emotional and psychological suffering. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, the fearlessness. I've had a fair amount of fearlessness. I've talked about this on this show, a fair amount of fearlessness in my life before, but that's only because my fear was banished from my awareness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it does deprive one of the possibility of growing in courage. And
Mm-hmm.
there's actually more merit in being courageous, feeling the fear than in the fearlessness. Right?
Yeah.
Because with fearlessness, you're out of touch with a part of yourself. And it makes it also really hard for you to connect with other people who
Mm-hmm.
are experiencing fear. Right? You can
Yeah.
wind
Yeah.
up looking at them with contempt or with criticism, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because their own fear, if you allow yourself to like connect with that, would activate your own. So for a
Mm-hmm.
lot of years, for decades, really, I suppressed a lot of fear,
Oh,
and
okay.
could do things that looked brave, and I would be, complimented for that. But they
Oh,
weren't
okay.
really they weren't really courageous because I wasn't experiencing the fear that went with it. It was sort of like being numbed to it.
Mm.
So now that's adaptive in certain situations, like crisis situations, where it's not helpful to get overwhelmed with fear. But on a day-to-day level, with the kinds of garden variety challenges that do bring up fear, anxiety, or nervousness in us, it's not actually all that helpful because when we disconnect from our emotions, we're missing something of ourselves. So
Yeah.
that's why, really kind of sensing it is important.
You know what's I love about the word courage, in French, courage, and the word
Courage,
you get it more in French is cœur, is part of courage, which
right?
means heart. And I'm
Heart,
sure it's a Latin or
right?
originating word. I don't know my Latin as well as my
Core,
French.
yeah,
Core. There we go. So, and to me, literally, to encourage somebody is to give them heart,
right,
right? Which is so
right.
interesting. And in the psalm, which I don't often remember to mention, but I thought there was a powerful part in the responsorial psalm where it says, see you lowly ones and be glad. You who seek God, may your
May
hearts
your hearts
revive.
revive.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So
Exactly. May your hearts revive.
so how do we allow, like, because to me, what I was talking about before was about not going into an anxious state. But what we really want to happen is more than that, is to allow God to revive our hearts, to encourage, to fill us with courage. And we will be, you know what I mean? So that when we face whatever we're facing, we're actually really using that virtue. We're not suppressing
Yeah,
anything.
that's right. We're not suppressing just the fear. And this is one of those things where it really comes from practicing it. There's certain assumptions that we have really deeply embedded that create fear. That for some people it's conflict, right? If I enter into conflict with somebody, some really terrible things are going to happen, and maybe that's because when they were young, that was true, right? There's a lot of residual left over from that, and so we need corrective experiences. We need these experiences where we take on what we're afraid of in a good way,
Hmm.
and have a different outcome.
Right.
Because otherwise, one of the things that's really limiting about phobias, for example, is that, like bridge phobias. I've had a number of people with bridge phobias in my practice over the years. Fear of crossing a bridge, the bridge is going to collapse or they're going to fall off, that kind of thing. And one of the things that happens is they avoid going over bridges. And the more they avoid going over bridges, the more the fear is reinforced because they say, look, this is unconscious, right? I didn't go over the bridge and I lived, right? So it seems to prove the corollary. If I do go over the bridge, the harm will come to
Hmm.
me. And so
Yeah.
what they wind up doing is then not even going near the bridges, right? They actually get further and further away from ever going over a bridge, right? They don't even want to go near a street. They don't want to drive by a street that's near a river where there's a bridge for fear of being forced to turn onto the bridge, and then being
So
able to.
you just gave me flashbacks to two different experiences. One was, first of all, I have a bit of bridge fear, but
Oh, okay.
only those big ones where when you're going over them and it's like metal underneath those, and so it doesn't feel like the same kind of solid. Like you're
Right,
on, and the surface just feels different than a regular road, right?
right,
And you
right.
just feel like I felt unsteady. The other one was once years ago. We took our kids to. This is not a bridge, but it's worse. We took our kids to Hawaii, and we decided on this whatever island we were on. I think it was Maui, and we decided we were going on the other side of the island to do horseback riding or something. And we had to drive, to this one through one little town that was on the side of like a cliff, and it was a one-way road on the side of a cliff with no railing on the other side, and just a bit more room than what could fit a car. And if another car was coming the other way toward me, I don't know what I could have done because I can't even imagine backing up or what. And I can remember I had my wife and my kids in the back, and I'm driving along the side of this cliff, thinking one wrong turn and we're on the other side. We're
Yeah,
dead. And
yeah,
that I'm trying to think: was I suppressing my fear, or did I rally courage? I
right,
got through it.
right. Well, if you, I mean, it would depend on whether you felt it. It
I
would depend
definitely
on whether
felt the fear.
then you have courage, right? Because
Okay.
in that situation, if you had suppressed your fear, it wouldn't bother you.
Oh, that's what you
Okay, the
mean.
fear wouldn't bother you at all. Like so, this still happens to me. If a dog comes after me, most of the time when dogs go after people, they get afraid. I have a different reaction. When a dog comes after me, I get angry and I don't feel fear. And my initial reaction, this happens without me even realizing it, is I will charge the dog. And so there I'm actually not feeling the fear when that happens. And
Right.
um
Interesting.
and and so that's really different than what you're describing, which is, working with the fear, managing the fear, overcoming the fear, continuing on with the drive, being careful, right?
Right.
And I think sometimes
I
people
was
have.
close to paralysis. I got close to being like frozen, but I didn't. I just kept going. So that
Yeah,
is courage.
that is
Okay.
courage. That is
Yeah.
courage. Yeah.
I might have put
Whereas,
some Hail Mary in there too, probably more
well,
than
yeah, I
once.
mean, then clearly you're clearly practicing courage, right? And so courage is a natural virtue. and it is something that we increase by practicing it. It's a human virtue that we increase by practicing it. And so, it's kind of like and what we need to do is put ourselves into a position in which we have to execute courage. So when you were on that road, you were in a position where you had to rise up to that challenge, right?
Yes.
Where it
Yes.
really pulled for you to do that, right? And we have a lot of choices about whether we want to put ourselves in situations or not put ourselves in situations that are going to require us to be challenged, and they're going to require courage, right? Do I go to this meeting, when I know that there might be some people there that are going to disagree with me, or do I
Hmm.
answer this email with what I really think, or
Hmm.
do I not go to my relative's wedding because it's a wedding outside the church, apostasy, and so forth? Am I willing to stand up for the faith? um, am I willing to really live out what the gospel is calling me to do, or do I shrink away from it because of fear? Now, here's the thing. I think that we get tempted, that Satan tempts us in the particular areas of natural weakness, right? So grace builds on nature, right? Perfects nature. Grace perfects nature. So if we have areas in the natural realm that we're particularly in need of strengthening, those are the weak points that we're going to get tested on. Those are the weak points that we're going to get tested on. So for some people, they struggle with pusillanimity. Pusillanimity is
You've been
that
dying to
fear.
say that word.
I've been dying to say pusillanimity. I even checked the pronunciation of it before the show to make sure I said it right. Practiced it a few times. Um, but yeah, I mean, even in that, like I could have avoided saying pusillanimity. I mean, I could have screwed that up. But we can put ourselves in these situations to actually trust that God is going to help us, to trust that things are going to work out, to embrace these challenges, or we can shrink away. And I know a number of people who have coped with fear by withdrawing into the safer and safer realms, right? They've narrowed and constricted their realm of action, to become smaller so they didn't feel challenged. But what happens is that then things within that realm start to seem challenging, right? So things that didn't bother them before, it didn't cause fear before, now cause them fear, right? So that shrinking away doesn't actually resolve the problem. It's actually going to
Hmm.
exacerbate the problem of pusillanimity, or that's a rough synonym for cowardice in the future. So
Yeah.
so I'm going to really be recommending that, not only on the natural realm but also on the spiritual realm, it's on both realms, that we exercise that courage, that we take
Absolutely.
on, and this is the action item, right? That we take on one thing that we've not been doing because of fear. Right? There's usually, if we look at ourselves honestly, there's something we haven't done, somebody we haven't talked to, somebody we haven't reached out to, an email we haven't answered, a fraternal correction that we haven't made because of fear. And so I'm going to invite you to discern, to pray about it, to ask for the graces, and then, you know, a lot of times people want their fear to go down. Your fear might not go down. If it doesn't go down, you move forward anyway. I mean, it's not doing anything imprudent or rash, but it is saying, yes, I'm going to trust in God that no matter what happens, I'm going to be okay. He has the number of hairs on my head counted. He knows my every thought. He knows exactly what I need. I'm going to practice this.
Hmm.
That's the
Wonderful.
action item.
Wonderful.
That is the
Sweet.
action item.
I love
So,
that. I love that. Ah, so how can we be a little bit more brave? And basically, choosing to what I'm hearing is you're choosing to do something that you know is right, or
is right.
you feel is
Right.
convicted, but there might be a part of you that is afraid and fearful, and you're having to ground yourself in your identity and who you are as a child of God,
That's
and be able
exactly
to
right.
take a risk. Obviously a risk, done with compassion and understanding toward others, but stillness, but with true love, right?
Right. Right. And also, understanding for yourself and not condemning yourself for being afraid. Sometimes people do that. But our Lord was afraid, and he admitted it. When he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, Our Lady, searching for our Lord when he was 12 years old in the temple, talked about how anxious he was. We've been searching for you for 3 days. Troubled hearts on a human level. I mean, there's nothing sinful about that at all. So yeah, that's a natural part of our experience, and we need to rise up and overcome. And that's why you mentioned it at the top of the show, that Resilient Catholics Carpe Diem, that community around the podcast that you can find at soulsandhearts.com, the Resilient Catholics community. We actually work on we work on courage. We have like I said, that little workshop on managing stress that gets into some of these things and how do you work with it
Yeah.
more
Because I love the
specifically.
word
So
resilience, because the word resilience speaks to kind of coming back, even with courage, even from difficult and traumatic or painful experiences. So it's really about that ability to really overcome and thrive despite negative pasts. And so I will also say, yes, please come to soulsandhearts.com if you haven't already, and just sign up to be on our regular subscriber, so you'll get the weekly skim that tells you all the different things that we're coming out with. And also, you can check out our blogs. We have a weekly blog every week. We have a special Journeys of the Heart blog also, where that's very moving and powerful. And we have free courses, and we have some paid courses as well on all sorts of topics. So please join us, join this interior pilgrimage, to come to know God better by overcoming our human obstacles.
yep.
All right. It was good to spend this time with you, Dr. Peter.
It is great to be with you, Dr. Jerry. We treasure our time together. And thank you to all of you who listen to this podcast. If you have just been listening to the podcast, check out soulsandhearts.com. There's plenty of other stuff here. And let your friends know. If you know of somebody that could benefit from knowing about this podcast, let them know. Reach out to
Yep.
them. Be a chance to open that up.
Subscribe, save, and share. Right? Those are the things I'm supposed to say for
I
everybody to
don't
do. All right.
know.
All right. Well, good. Take care. We'll see you next time on Be With the Word and at soulsandhearts.com. Until then, be still
Believe,
and be
be
loved.
loved.
Take good care.
God bless you all.